Hi, let me ask you a question. Can you describe, think about, or talk about anxiety or depression without resorting to a list of symptoms, or without kind of describing how difficult it is or how unpleasant it is or how much it's cost you in terms of time, resources, relationships, etc.? It's actually quite hard to do, and the reason it's quite hard to do is because anxiety and depression and most mental health problems kind of capture you and they put you in a symptom prison. So you're focused on the symptoms, you're focused on what it feels like, you're focused on your lived experience of anxiety and depression. And that symptom prison denies you the opportunity of moving into problem-solving mode. Now, you solve problems all the time, and yet there seems to be something about the problems of anxiety and depression which are difficult to solve. They're much harder for you to solve. And one of the reasons is, I would suggest, is that you don't have a problem-solving language that you can use to think about the problem in a productive way. An example would be, for instance, if you were working on an older car before they became really, really high-tech, there are some skills to acquire about distributors and spark plugs and points and gears and oil and all sorts of other bits and pieces. And that's the language of fixing a car engine. Well, do you have a language for resolving your own mental health or someone else's mental health problems? Now, as a psychologist, I have a language that's useful, and I use that language to help people all the time. And everybody else who works in this field, this helping field, will have a language, perhaps different language to mine, but they will have a language. But the question is this: do you have a language that you can use to think about the problems, let's say, of anxiety, depression in a useful way? Without a language, you're stuck more or less in a non-productive problem-solving mode. Now, let me give you an example. If I was to say to you, can you tell me something about your experience of anxiety? You might say, oh, well, I don't know, I feel restless all the time. I feel like something bad's about to happen. I feel like I'm always worrying about stuff. Okay, restless, something bad's about to happen, worrying about stuff. Well, if you're familiar with my work, you will know that I define and describe anxiety to some degree as an overestimation of threat. Your brain is overestimating the threat you're under. And that's true because when you look around, it's very hard to find an objective threat that actually makes any sense as to why you're feeling anxious. Okay? So the first thing we could say is your brain is doing something that gives you the experience of anxiety, which is not valid in the external world, right? So now we have a piece of understanding that we can use. You might say that you're restless. Okay, so you're tense, you might feel stressed. So now we have an introduction to some physiology. You might say you worry all the time. Okay, so actually we recognize that we've got the habit of worry going on, and this is a brain process of going over the same thing over and over again. So what we've done is we've kind of stepped back from the pure symptom list, and we've kind of broken it up into something which is a little bit more useful and that we can do something about, because we can recalibrate your brain so there's less overestimation of threat. We can reduce the feeling of tension and restlessness by practicing relaxation and breathing exercises, and we can stop the worry process by actually teaching your brain not to worry, because worry is more or less just a habit of thought, right? You accept it to be something that you do, but really it's just a habit that you get into. And so by breaking down your experience with symptoms a little bit more carefully, and by recognizing and having some language with which to understand them, we can apply problem-solving tools to the problems of anxiety. And the same is true of the problems of depression. I mean, depression, I would often describe it as an overestimation of faults and failings and an underestimation of strengths and resources. Now, just that statement alone gives you a whole lot more language that you can use to think about and understand your problems with depression, right? An overestimation of faults and failings. An underestimation of strengths and resources. So you can see that at both ends, you're underestimating and you're overestimating, and therefore the problem-solving strategy is to recalibrate to external reality. So I hope you find this interesting. It's quite a revolutionary thought in a way. The problems of anxiety and depression persist because you don't have the language to switch you into problem solving mode. If you do have the language to switch yourself into problem solving mode, then you can think more carefully about the problems and simply solve them, because anxiety and depression are solvable problems. And I say this a lot, and it still astounds me that people seem not to believe it, but look, if you go to a therapist, you'll probably be helped. And a therapist might well cure you of anxiety and depression, working together, not because they have some magical gift, but because they understand the language of the problem that you're struggling with. And they can apply that language and the understanding that goes with it to your problem. You do not have that language. That's why you need to go to a therapist. If you did have it, you wouldn't need to go to a therapist. Okay? So a therapist sits in that gap between you and your experience and the research and medical knowledge that enables us to understand how to resolve these problems. The therapist simply teaches you what you need to know to be able to resolve the problem yourself. Because actually, the therapist doesn't resolve the problem for you. They just teach you how to resolve it yourself. If you want to acquire the language of active self-help, of being able to resolve your own psychological problems yourself, then please check out the Anxiety Wizard program. It will teach you everything you need to know to resolve panic, anxiety, depression and stress.